Hi, everyone. Welcome to Let the Girls Game. This is a podcast mini-series that will run for the next 5 Wednesdays on the Infinite Scroll podcast feed right here. In this series, I explore the challenges, the successes, and the history of women in gaming. And to help me explore these topics, I'm bringing you interviews with 5 amazing women in the space. Some of them are streamers, game developers, scholars, journalists. It will be a really good time. So these episodes will be between 10 to 15 minutes long, just like a mini scroll episode. And if you like these episodes and you want to hear me dive into them a little bit more in depth, please do let me know. And thank you so much to Let's Sing for sponsoring this mini series. So without further ado, welcome to Let the Girls Game. In the mid-90s, the gaming industry decided that it was time to expand its audience beyond just boys and men. Enter the Games for Girls movement. The goal was simple: to reach a new audience and to spark young girls' interest in computers and tech. It all kicked off with Her Interactive's release of Mackenzie & Co. in 1995, a game following a junior high student as she hoped to find a date. Building on this success, Her Interactive hit gold with the Nancy Drew gaming series in 1998. Sensing an opportunity, Mattel also jumped on the bandwagon with Barbie Fashion Designer in 1996. The dress-up computer game featuring the iconic Barbie doll. Mattel continued to ride this wave through the 90s, later creating titles like Magic Fairy Tales, Barbie as Rapunzel, and Barbie Storymaker. As Mary Kenny notes for Harper's Bazaar, on one side were the pink games, such as the Barbie titles, and on the other were the purple games, by developers like Her Interactive and Purple Moon. Ultimately, Kenny goes on to note how this divide came to reflect, quote, what was feminist versus what was feminine. Having said that, the legacy is mixed. Critics argue that it perpetuated stereotypes about gender and play, offering a narrow view of girlhood. Whereas others highlight how successes like Barbie Fashion Designer proved that girls were genuinely interested in computers and video games. Despite its controversies, the Games for Girls movement was a pioneering effort that invited women and girls into the gaming world, laying the groundwork for a more inclusive industry. Welcome to Let the Girls Game, a podcast mini-series where we explore the history and stories of women in gaming, powered by Let's Sing. I'm your host, Lauren Meisner, and today we are discussing the history of women in gaming with a focus on the Games for Girls movement. And to help me explore this topic today, I am joined by Ally Hennessey. Welcome, Ally.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for doing this. So for anyone that doesn't know, Ally is a game developer, author, illustrator, and advocate for underrepresented groups across the gaming industry. She fell into gaming through cosplay and has since worked on many different projects. Currently, Ally serves as the game director and writer for Mystique's Haunted Antiques through the Sydney-based studio Lemonade Games. Ally has also conducted extensive research on the Games for Girls movement, focusing specifically on Magic Fairy Tales, Barbie as Rapunzel. Amazing. I'm so excited to have you here today and chat with you about all of your work through the industry and your research specifically. So I wanted to start with your interest in Games for Girls and Magic Fairy Tales, Barbie as Rapunzel. Can you kind of talk me through how you became interested and your research in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I played Magic Fairy Tales, Barbie as Rapunzel. It's such a long name.
Yeah, it is. It's a mouthful.
The full legal name. I played it when I was a kid and then promptly forgot about it completely. And then it wasn't until during lockdown, I was actually working at a AAA studio doing some research into different UI, UX interfaces. And I really accidentally stumbled upon a screenshot from Barbie as Rapunzel. And suddenly it was all the flashbacks. I was like, man, I remember the cake decorating. I remember the cave troll.
Yeah.
I remember the mermaid. And so I ended up, I had nothing to do in lockdown. So I watched a YouTube playthrough of the entire game.
Oh my God.
And it was that's just a beautiful thing to do if you have a game from your childhood to go back and a lot of these games aren't preserved, so we can't play them, but there are YouTube playthroughs that you can watch. But it wasn't until it hit the credits and I saw how many women worked on the game that I was really inspired to then dig a little deeper into the history of it. Started looking up all their names on LinkedIn, just being like, are you still around? What will you talk to me? And I really didn't have any intention of doing anything with that. I just thought it would be nice to connect with these people and maybe get the chance to tell them that game had an impact on me and how fondly I remembered it, and the fact that I was making games now. But it just sort of spiraled into this rabbit hole of learning all about Mattel Media and how that game was made and all the different people that worked on it.
What were some of your most interesting findings in conducting this research?
I mean, it was a wild development. And I mean, if you read the article, there's a lot of things that happened. We could talk about it
Yes,
for hours.
yeah.
But I think probably the big takeaway for me was, I guess when I imagined them making Barbie games in the 90s, I imagined like, I don't know, like they would have this beautiful pink office.
Yeah.
And that they would have all this Barbie money to just kind of like figure it out. But of course that's never the case. Like with any game development, it's always difficult and it's always against all odds, and particularly being some of the first people to make games like that. That was really quite an uphill battle for them. They weren't even in the Mattel building. They were like down the street.
Oh my
in
God.
a different office. So they were really a skunkworks, and they really had to prove themselves to Mattel even like internally as this is something that is going to make money. This is something that there's an audience for. Which really resonated with me because that's been a lot of my career as well.
Yeah, that kind of scrappy startup vibe, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how the games developed through this movement, like the Games for Girls movement, encapsulated the experience of girlhood. In what ways do you think that these games reflected or influenced the identity of their young women audience?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, hey, because girlhood is not a monolith, as we know. Everybody has a different experience of life and of childhood. And so I don't think that there's one thing that we can point to that we can say this is what Games for Girls did, or this is what Purple Moon type games did, this is what Mattel type games did. I think for me, like the biggest influence it had on me was that I had a sense of ownership over these games. I grew up with two older brothers. A lot of women who work in games, this might be an oversimplification, but a lot of women who work in games grew up in households where other people were gaming. And so they weren't necessarily, I don't know if that's so true of like younger women now, but certainly of like,
Millennial
I sound
age.
so old.
Yes. Oh my God.
Generation.
I know. Anytime I say anything about the generations, I'm like, I sound like a boomer.
But so I had two older brothers, and so I was exposed to gaming mostly through them. And it wasn't until Barbie games and Games for Girls that I felt like I had something that was mine to own, and mine not only to play, but to form opinions about, and also to just have like basic computer literacy, like to learn what a CD-ROM is, like how it works in the computer, all of that stuff. Like we kind of take it for granted now, but at the time that was really special.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a debate that I kind of mentioned in the intro as to whether these games were reductionist or not. I'm curious where you stand on that, and do we owe it to developers at the time to give this movement some grace, given, like you said, it was kind of the beginning and they were trying to prove themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that any of there was a very broad variety of games made within that period. I don't think that any of them are any more reductive than like other media being made at the time. Like I don't think that like Mary-Kate and Ashley Magical Mystery Mall was any more reductive than like Legally Blonde.
True.
So I think it's very of the era. And I do think, we need to be understanding of the cultural context in which things were made.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that for sure. As a game developer today, how do you think the movement has influenced contemporary game design and development?
I think probably the biggest thing that I can point to in terms of its influence on my experience as a game developer is just how many women, and not just women, but mostly women, played these games as kids and then fell in love with games and the idea of interactive experiences and even just the idea of computers. And then pursued this career. So I think that's probably the biggest legacy. A lot of game development is reference. Like, remember this thing from this game, remember this thing from this game. And it's really special when you get to be in a design meeting with someone who's like, remember the cake decorating minigame from Barbie's Rapunzel? I think that's the legacy.
Yeah. How can game developers and designers today better consider the experiences of womanhood and girlhood in video games?
Yeah, I think other than the obvious of employing women to work on those games, I think it's on us as artists and as creatives to have a really broad media diet. So to look outside of just what are other games doing in their depictions of gender, go and watch movies, go to the theater, listen to music made by people who are different to you, and just try and have a broader view of the world and like how we can depict human experience. I think that's ultimately the way to go.
What do you believe is the lasting impact of the Games for Girls movement on the gaming industry? And are there any specific elements or lessons from that era that you see reflected in today's games or the industry practice as a whole?
I mean, the games industry changes like so fast. I don't know what it's going to be next week.
Yeah.
But what it is right now, there are a lot of particularly over the last 10 years, there's been a rise of sort of cozy games and wholesome games. And I think that the cozy games movement wouldn't exist if not for the work done in the 90s by the women who built that movement. So a lot of reinterpreting what an interactive experience can be about and what play is. You know, it's not always about action. It's not always about combat. It can be about the experience of running a shop. It can be about the experience of decorating a cake. It can be just a story. It can be a linear storybook style narrative.
Like
the game can
world
be
building.
anything. Yeah, it can be anything.
Yeah, like Stardew Valley vibes, right?
Yes.
Love that. So given that we're discussing, video games from the 90s, how do you feel that nostalgia influences the video games of today?
So many ways. I think that fundamentally, it's just a really broad answer. I'm sorry.
No, love that.
Fundamentally, game design is iteration. And so you're always just reinterpreting and repositioning the same ideas over and over and over again. And I think in terms of how nostalgia influences games, it depends on the type of game that you're making. So if you're there's like the movement of like boomer shooters at the moment.
Wait, what is that?
It's like, I don't want to be reductionist about it. They're very cool, but they're like retro graphics shooters, kind of like Doom, reimaginings of games like Doom.
Right,
they're hugely popular and like hugely financially successful for a lot of people, which shows you that there's like a huge place for pure nostalgia.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a place for taking nostalgic elements and reimagining it into something completely new and completely different. I think it's about knowing who your audience is and what kind of game you're trying to make. Like for me, not to like plug my own game, but
go for it.
For Mystiques, we're trying to make something new. We're trying to make something that that hasn't been done before, but it is pulling on a lot of references and riffing on a lot of nostalgic things like Barbie games, like Purple Moon games, like Stardew Valley, in order to build that experience. Because interactive is just a puzzle of different ways of playing with things.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ally. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can follow Mystique's Game on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram. We're making a game about the 4 worst women you've ever met.
Oh my God, what does that mean?
They just suck. They're running a failing antique store. They're all incredibly self-involved, dramatic people. I love making games and telling stories about women in all of their flaws and all of their insanity. So we're making that game, and also there are ghosts.
Oh, love that. That sounds diverse. Thank you so much again to Ally for joining me. Thank you to Let's Sing for powering this mini-series, and thank you to you for listening to Let the Girls Game. Tune in next week where I'll be joined with 2 gaming scholars, and we're going to be diving into Gamergate. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. I love you guys, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.